You are asking why the thought of disappointing the collective, your parents, your partner, the amorphous massa, is so terrifying. The answer is clinical, not moral. You have been systematically programmed for psychological dependence. This is the core pathology of the modern age, an epidemic of neurosis disguised as virtuous living. What you are experiencing is not merely fatigue, it is the slow, grinding exhaustion of the seek attempting to sustain a lie. You are carrying an intolerable psychic burden, the weight of a persona that does not fit the structure of your authentic self. The persona is the mask society hands you, and you wear it religiously, believing that if you perform your role perfectly, the successful child, the agreeable colleague, the generous friend, you will be safe. You believe this performance guarantees love, acceptance, or at minimum, the absence of conflict. But here is the cold, hard truth. The persona is a static defense mechanism, and the seek is a dynamic, volcanic system of living instincts. When you attempt to suffocate the authentic self, the dangerous, instinctual contents of the inconscience, by relentlessly conforming to external expectations, you are not achieving peace. You are initiating a civil war within your own mind. Every time you say yes when the internal reality demands no, you are repressing a piece of vital energy. This repressed energy does not vanish. It merely retreats into the shadows of the inconscience soul, where it coagulates, gains autonomy, and transforms into a complexo autonomo. These complexos autonomos are like splinter personalities or internal parasites, traumas and unlived instincts with a will of their own. They govern your behavior from the shadows, demanding sacrifice and perpetuating the very patterns of submission you desperately try to escape. The attempt to do everything right, to follow the prescribed map of social acceptability, is precisely why you are failing. You are sacrificing your reality on the altar of the collective's expectations. This strategy guarantees a mental breakdown because the structures you are building are fundamentally unstable. They are built on the shifting sand of external approval. When you live primarily through your persona, you are essentially projecting your locus of control outward. You teach the world that your internal state, your self-worth, your emotional stability, is contingent upon their reaction. This is psychological suicide. You become a resource to be harvested by the massa because the collective mind, operating at the lowest common denominator, is ruthless and demanding. It does not want you to be whole. It wants you to be predictable and useful. The collective demands perpetual agreeableness because it is terrified of the individual who stands alone. The moment you assert a genuine boundary, the moment you articulate a truth that contradicts the established narrative, you become a threat. The collective will immediately withdraw its validation, triggering the primal terror of isolation that was programmed into you since childhood. We are biological creatures, and isolation once meant certain death. Today, that instinctual terror is manipulated by social pressure. This is the psychological mechanism behind the Machiavellian insight. A man who wishes to make a profession of goodness in everything must necessarily come to grief among so many who are not good. Machiavelli was observing the objective reality of the human seek, operating in a collective environment. The environment is not benign, it is competitive, driven by ego and the will to power. When you enter this arena armed only with the fragile shield of agreeableness, you are inviting destruction. You are signaling that you are easily manipulated. Consider the dynamic of projeção, the people who demand your endless self-sacrifice. The ones who complain the fire isn't hot enough even as you burn, are often projecting their own unlived lives and repressed selfishness onto you. They need you to remain weak, agreeable, and predictable, because your submission validates their own refusal to face their inner sombra. If you achieve psychological sovereignty, if you become the prince of your own mind, you expose their servitude. This is why they will fight your individuation tooth and nail. The fear of being disliked, of being labeled cold or selfish, is the final chain of the slave morality. This morality, which elevates self-sacrifice as the highest good, is a brilliant system for maintaining the established order. It ensures that the most capable individuals, the ones with the strength to say no, are paralyzed by guilt. To achieve sovereignty, you must be willing to make the necessary sacrifice, the sacrifice of the need to be liked. You must integrate the capacity for ruthlessness, not the ruthlessness of a sociopath, but the surgical precision required to protect your mental structure. You must learn how not to be good in the collective sense, meaning you must cultivate the strength to tolerate the disapproval of the massa. This confrontation forces you to integrate your sombra, the repressed aspects of your personality, including the aggressive instincts, the self-interest, and the capacity for decisive action. If you keep this dark, necessary side locked away, it will turn inward and destroy you. If you integrate it, it becomes the foundation of your psychological power, the strength required for individuation. The moment you stop seeking external validation, the complexes autonomos that thrive on your repression begin to starve. The terror of the ensuing silencio and solido is immense, but it is the prerequisite for self-rule. You must choose between the comfort of the crowd and the brutal fardo of self-ownership. There is no middle ground. You are either the sovereign entity or the servant in someone else's court. Stop throwing your precious psychic currency, your energy, your attention, your time, at people who have proven they are unwilling to bleed for you. This is the diagnosis. You are dying of an acute case of projected life, and the only cure is the ruthless assertion of your own objective reality. The question you must confront is why this act of self-sovereignty, the simple surgical act of saying no, feels like tearing off your own skin. Why does the possibility of disappointing a parent, a partner, or the faceless, murmuring massa feel like an existential threat? The answer lies in the mechanics of the persona, the fatal mask you have worn since childhood. The persona is not merely a social construct. It is a rigid structure within the psyche, an adaptive mechanism forged in the fires of collective expectation. It is the compromise between your essential, dangerous nature and the demands of society. We need a persona to function. Without it, we are raw, chaotic, and incapable of navigating the social landscape. However, the modern illness, the acute neurosis gripping the collective, is caused by the disastrous error of identifying with this mask. When you mistake the uniform for the soldier, the performance for the self, you commit a profound act of psychological suicide. The persona becomes a psychological straitjacket, restricting every impulse, every genuine feeling, every sharp, decisive instinct that does not fit the approved narrative. You become the actor who believes the role is reality, and the cost of maintaining this illusion is the repression of all that is authentic, vital, and necessary for self-rule. This is where the sombra is generated. The sombra is not inherently evil. It is the container for everything the conscious ego refuses to acknowledge about itself. If the persona is built upon the virtue of agreeableness, the sombra must house the capacity for ruthlessness, the healthy self-interest, the necessary aggression, and the capacity to tolerate being disliked. These are not flaws. They are the instruments of self-defense. By prioritizing external approval, you lock these essential capacities away in the inconscient pessoal. Understand the physics of the psyche. Psychic energy cannot be destroyed, only transformed or displaced. When you repress your capacity for self-assertion, when you desperately try to be good in the collective sense, that energy does not vanish. It gathers in the inconscient, coalescing around the repressed contents. This is how the complexes autonomos are formed. These complexes are psychic splinters, energetic fragments of the personality that have broken away from the conscious ego and acquired a dangerous, autonomous will. The most common complexo autonomo in the agreeable individual is the victim complex, or the martyr complex, fueled by the very aggression and resentment that the persona is designed to conceal. You believe you are sacrificing yourself out of love or duty, but in the dark recesses of the inconscient, the repressed anger at the world for demanding this sacrifice festers. This complex then begins to act out its stored energy, often sabotaging relationships, or creating situations where the individual is forced to suffer, thus confirming the original belief that they are owed gratitude or pity. This internal civil war, the ego clinging desperately to the shiny approved persona, while the complex's autonomos wage war from the shadows, is the definition of neurosis. You are paralyzed by indecision because the capacity for decisive action resides in the sombra. You cannot say no because the persona forbids it, and the moment you attempt to assert yourself, the autonomous complex floods the conscious mind with crippling anxiety and the terror of isolation. The ultimate danger of the overdeveloped persona is the profound disconnection from objective reality. You are living in a fiction. You are reacting not to the world as it is, but to the internalized image of how the world should perceive you. The internal compass, the genuine instinct, is silenced by the noise of external demands. This leads inevitably to projections. Because you refuse to integrate your own necessary ruthlessness, you see that ruthlessness everywhere outside of yourself. The world becomes a terrifying place populated by demanding, manipulative monsters. You are constantly fighting the shadows that are, in cold, hard truth, merely the reflection of the parts of yourself you have exiled. The Machiavellian shift requires the surgical removal of this identification. You must stop believing that you are the mask. This process is terrifying because the persona provides security. It is the currency of belonging. To shed it is to invite the solido of the sovereign. You will lose the approval of the massa, and their disapproval will be swift and brutal. They will call you cold, selfish, and difficult, precisely the terms your persona was built to avoid. This is the ultimate test. Can you withstand the collective judgment? If you cannot bear the fardeau of self-ownership, you will remain a resource to be harvested, a source of fuel for the psychic fires of others. You are throwing your precious psychic currency, your energy, your attention, your time, at people who have proven they are unwilling to bleed for you. The only path to individuation is through the conscious, voluntary sacrifice of the need to be liked. This is not about becoming a tyrant, it is about becoming the prince of your own mind. It means integrating the capacity for not being good, the strength to protect your mental structure, to enforce boundaries, and to reserve your benevolence for those who have earned it. Stop performing. Stop twisting your spine to fit into boxes built by others. The silence that follows their disapproval is not a void. It is the space where your authentic self finally has room to breathe. The cold, hard truth is that the massa does not care if you live or die, only whether you continue to play your assigned role. You must wake up from this collective slumber and recognize the urgency of this diagnosis. You are dying of an acute case of projected life, and the cure demands the ruthless assertion of your own objective reality. Why is this so damn hard? Why does the thought of disappointing your parents, your partner, or your boss feel like a psychological suicide? We are not talking about simple social anxiety here. We are talking about a visceral, gut-wrenching terror that overrides logic and self-preservation, triggering a full-scale mental breakdown. This is the precise moment where the clinical analysis must shift from the external environment, the demands of the massa, to the internal structure of the seek. The reason you cannot say no is not because you are weak, but because you are occupied. Your mind is not a unified republic. It is a battleground ruled by what I termed autonomous complexes. These are not mere memories or emotional scars. They are highly charged energetic splinters of the seek, usually formed around repressed trauma, unresolved conflicts, or fundamental instinctual needs that were denied expression. They possess a terrifying degree of autonomy, a will of their own. You genuinely believe you are the sovereign ruler of your consciousness, the driver behind the wheel of your life. But the cold, hard truth is that you are often just a passenger, sometimes a terrified hostage, while a complex, the people-pleaser complex, the validation-seeker complex, the good child complex, is violently steering the vehicle. When you attempt to assert genuine self-interest, when you try to enforce a boundary, to prioritize your own objective reality, that complex perceives it as an existential threat to its survival. It immediately slams on the psychic brakes, flooding your entire system with panic, shame, and guilt. That paralyzing anxiety you feel when you consider saying no is the complex defending its territory. Think of the complex as a highly organized military structure built from the ashes of past emotional wounds. For example, if a child learned early on that parental love was conditional upon perfect obedience, a complex forms around the function of obedience. Its primary directive is simple and brutal. Maintain conformity at all costs to ensure survival and avoid abandonment. This primitive directive operates entirely outside your conscious, rational control. It is a structure of the inconscient that demands compliance. Every time you twist yourself into a pretzel to avoid someone else's mild disapproval, you are not exercising free will. You are obeying the tyrannical compulsion of an internal fragment. The complex doesn't care about your happiness, your maturity, or your individuation. It cares only about repeating the archaic pattern it was built on. It forces you to project your worth onto external validation, because that is the mechanism it uses to maintain its power. When you live for others, you are feeding the complex, giving it more energy, making it stronger, and ensuring it remains autonomous. This is psychological slavery by self-betrayal. Look around. The modern epidemic of neurosis is nothing less than a mass surrender to these internal tyrants. People are walking around, highly functional perhaps, but fundamentally hollow, empty suits animated by the demands of their complexes and the projections of the massa. They mistake their compulsions for choice. They are not choosing to people-please. They are being compelled by an internal structure that has gone rogue. The collective demand for conformity finds fertile ground in the individual's desperate need to avoid the internal conflict that confronting the complex entails. This is the central psychological fardo of the modern individual. We must confront the fact that we are often not integrated beings, but fractured personalities, with powerful, autonomous parts acting against our conscious best interest. The complex is the mechanism that ensures the repression of the sombra, that powerful, dark, and often creative side of ourselves that we fear will be rejected by society. If the complex can keep us pleasing, keep us compliant, then the dangerous, authentic impulse, the capacity to be disliked, the strength to say no, remains locked away in the shadows. To become the sovereign entity Machiavelli spoke of, you must first engage in a ruthless internal audit. You must identify the specific complex that is holding the reins. Where did the trauma originate? What is the specific fear of abandonment or disapproval it is protecting? This process is not gentle. It is the psychological equivalent of pulling shrapnel out of the soul. It involves a conscious act of confrontation, forcing the repressed content into the light of consciousness. This is the hard work of individuation, the integration of the sombra, the assimilation of the autonomous fragments. The complex will fight back violently. When you finally refuse to perform, when you finally set a boundary, the complex will scream. It will flood your system with anxiety, shame, and guilt. It will tell you that you are selfish, that you are destroying your relationships, that you are fundamentally bad. This is the inevitable price, the sacrificio demanded for psychological freedom. You must be willing to endure the abysmo of that internal resistance. You must stand fast in the hurricane of your own complexes. If you succumb to the guilt, if you retreat back into the comfortable, compliant role, the complex wins, and your chance for sovereignty is lost. You must accept the cold, hard truth. The pain of setting a boundary is temporary. The pain of self-betrayal is chronic and leads to the slow, agonizing death of the soul. The Machiavellian principle, when viewed through a clinical lens, is an urgent call for psychic self-defense. You must develop the capacity for ruthlessness, not against others, but against the parts of yourself that are selling you out for cheap validation. Stop confusing self-sacrifice with virtue. True virtue requires strength, the strength to maintain the integrity of your mental structure, even when the internal tyrants and the external mob demand your surrender. The only way to stop being a resource harvested by others is to first cease being a resource harvested by your own complexes autonomos. This demands a surgical precision in analyzing your motives and a willingness to stand alone in the resulting silence, or the judgment of the anonymous massa cause such a profound, debilitating terror. Why does the idea of being disliked feel like a psychological suicide? The answer lies in the psychological mechanism of projection, which is the single greatest obstacle blocking the path to genuine sovereignty. When we fail to perform the difficult, agonizing work of integrating our own dark side, the sombra, the unconscious mind, which is a brutally efficient system, simply casts those unacknowledged contents onto the external world. The terrifying truth is this: the villain of your story, the enemy you spend all your energy fighting, is invariably a piece of yourself projected outside. Look closely at the person or group you despise most intensely. Analyze the qualities that trigger your deepest moral revulsion. I guarantee you will find that those qualities, be they hypocrisy, weakness, aggression, or naked self-interest, are precisely the contents you have most violently repressed within your own psyche. You cannot stand their arrogance because you have never allowed yourself the necessary, healthy assertion of your own ego. You detest their perceived moral corruption because you are terrified of the autonomous, instinctual drives that lurk beneath the thin veneer of your carefully curated persona. This is the cold, hard truth of human conflict. We do not fight external realities. We fight our own internal ghosts dressed up in the flesh of our neighbors. By projecting your sombra, you achieve a temporary, neurotic comfort. You maintain the illusion of moral purity, the lie that you are entirely good and virtuous, while simultaneously locating all the dangerous, powerful, and often necessary aspects of the human condition outside yourself. This is the neurosis of the modern age, the desperate need to be a victim, because being a victim allows one to remain morally flawless while placing the entire fardeau of responsibility onto the external oppressor. But this act of moral outsourcing comes at a devastating price. Every time you project equality, you are effectively disarming yourself. The traits you fight in others are often the very tools you need to achieve individuation and self-rule. When you project power, assertiveness, or ruthless efficiency onto a perceived enemy, you are ensuring that you, the subjective entity, remain weak, passive, and agreeable. You are giving your power away, locking your vital instincts into the external object, and then dedicating your life to fighting the phantom that now holds your own strength hostage. This is why the Machiavellian principle is not about manipulation. It is about psychological self-defense. If you do not retrieve your projections, you will forever be enslaved by them. You will spend your life reacting to external stimuli, consumed by rage, fear, or moral indignation, instead of taking command of the struttura psychica that generates those reactions. The most dangerous lie is the belief that your suffering is exclusively caused by them, the parents, the state, the partner, the system. This external focus is the ultimate refusal of consciousness. It is a profound act of psychological cowardice, a retreat from the terrifying reality that the source of your misery often resides in your own unexamined, inconscious soul. When a man complains endlessly that the world is unfair, that others are self-serving, and that he is always exploited, he is merely describing the consequences of his own refusal to develop the strength required to navigate a world populated by flawed, self-interested human beings. He is complaining about the knife fight while insisting on carrying only a bouquet of flowers. His neurosis is not caused by the external world. His neurosis is his insistence that the external world should conform to his internal, morally sanitized fantasy. Stop viewing yourself as a victim. The moment you declare yourself a victim, you surrender your capacity for action and place your entire psychological future in the hands of the perceived oppressor. This is not empowerment. This is the psychological suicide of self-betrayal, disguised as moral superiority. The path to sovereignty demands a ruthless audit of your grievances. Every intense dislike, every overwhelming judgment must be treated as a clinical symptom pointing directly back to a repressed content within your own sombra. When you confront the person you hate, you are actually confronting the shadow self you have exiled. This is the necessary sacrificio demanded by consciousness. You must be willing to dismantle the pleasant, harmless image you hold of yourself. You must acknowledge the existence of your own capacity for aggression, selfishness, and darkness. Only by recognizing and integrating these dangerous, autonomous instincts can you stop projecting them onto others and finally achieve the psychological robustness required to stand alone. If you insist on being good in the naive, agreeable sense, you will generate a colossal caucus sombra that will eventually manifest as a powerful complexo autonomo. This complex will drive you to find external enemies, scapegoats, to carry the moral burden you refuse to bear. This is the precise mechanism that leads to mass movements and collective hysteria, where the individual, terrified of his own internal chaos, eagerly joins the mob to project his repressed darkness onto a common enemy. The price of key individuation is the profound, isolating realization that you are responsible for your own psychological reality. You must pull your projections back from the world and bear the weight of your own flawed, dangerous nature. When you stop fighting the external villain, you are finally free to face the real tyrant, the unintegrated, autonomous complex that governs you from the depths of your own inconscience. This is the true meaning of ruling reality. It begins with ruling the inner domain. If you are terrified of the silence that follows disapproval, it is because you have not yet found the strength to look into the abysmo of your own soul, and accept the totality of what you find there. You must cease the frantic performance for the external audience and begin the surgical task of integrating the dangerous self. Only then will the need for external validation cease to be a chain, and the sovereignty you seek will become an objective, undeniable fact of your existence. This is not comfort. It is the fardo ire of consciousness, and it is the only path out of the epidemic of modern neurosis. The thought of disappointing your parents, your partner, or your social circle is so paralyzing because you have outsourced your moral compass to the collective. You have allowed the external world to hold the definition of your goodness, and the moment you step outside that narrow definition, you feel the terrifying chill of psychological annihilation. This is the root of the neurosis epidemic. The individual, terrified of the responsibility of self-rule, attempts a form of psychological suicide by conforming entirely to the demands of the massa. The cure for this enslavement is not found in superficial self-help platitudes, but in the brutal, surgical process of individuação. This process demands the integration of the sombra. You must cease the frantic performance of being good, and instead face the cold, hard truth. You are a human being, which means you carry the full spectrum of instinctual drives, including the capacity for ruthlessness, selfishness, and calculated indifference. If you deny this capacity, if you insist on being purely virtuous, you do not eliminate the darkness, you merely push it into the God inconscience. There, it does not lie dormant. It evolves into a powerful, complexo autonomo that sabotages your life from the shadows. This repressed darkness is the source of your people-pleasing. You are so terrified of the destructive potential of your own sombra that you project it onto the outside world, making them the ultimate moral authority. You obey them because you fear the judgment that reflects your own internal, unacknowledged guilt. The integration of the ka sombra o is the psychological equivalent of walking into a dark basement and acknowledging the presence of the machinery you once pretended didn't exist. It means admitting, yes, I can be selfish. Yes, I can be indifferent to your suffering. Yes, I can be harsh when necessary. This acknowledgement is not a license for malice. It is the first step toward conscious control. When you know you possess the capacity for destructive behavior, you gain the power to choose not to exercise it. Goodness that comes from conscious choice, after facing the abyss abysmo, yes, is robust. Goodness that comes from fear and repression is merely moral cowardice, and it leaves you psychologically defenseless. When the sombroen is integrated, the need for external validation begins to dissolve. This leads to the cultivation of what might be termed holy indifference, a profound strategic detachment from the emotional output of the massa. The neurotic mind is constantly monitoring the social field, reacting to every flicker of disapproval or praise, burning tremendous psychic energy in the process. The sovereign mind understands that the opinions of others are merely noise, external projections that have nothing to do with objective reality or the integrity of the poris seek. Your energy is your gold. Your attention is your currency. The neurotic individual squanders this currency, constantly throwing it at strangers and acquaintances, hoping to buy a moment of perceived safety. The individual undergoing individuação understands that this energy must be reserved exclusively for the internal task, the maintenance and expansion of consciousness. You must guard your estrutura psichica like a fortress under siege. Let them complain that you are unavailable. Let them label you cold. Their disappointment is merely the sound of their control mechanism failing. This detachment must be paired with the strategic use of silencio. The moment you feel the compulsion to explain yourself, to justify a boundary, or to defend a decision to those who lack the capacity to understand your inner process, you are falling back into the old pattern of servitude. The neurotic explains. The sovereign acts. When you refuse to engage in the social theater, when you simply say no and let the silence absorb the resulting external reaction, you are asserting a profound psychological truth. Your reality is non-negotiable. Silencio is a container for power. The unexpressed thought holds more weight than the hastily articulated defense. If you are constantly justifying your existence, you signal to the world that your self-worth is provisional, subject to their review. Stop chasing consensus. Stop offering detailed explanations for why you must reserve your time, your resources, or your affection. The truly autonomous individual does not need permission or validation to exist. This path of Yono Individuação is the ultimate Machiavellian act of self-sovereignty, not because it seeks to manipulate others, but because it ruthlessly eliminates the capacity to be manipulated. But be warned, this is a path of profound solidão. The Kawa Massa demands conformity, and when they see an individual who has successfully withdrawn their projeção and accepted their own totality, they react with hostility. Your freedom is a mirror reflecting their own psychological bondage, and they will instinctively try to drag you back down into the collective neurosis. You must be willing to accept the fardo of consciousness. This is not a warm embrace. It is the cold, hard realization that you are fundamentally alone in the universe of your own seek, and that responsibility for your being rests solely on your shoulders. The price of true self-rule is the sacrificio of the desperate need to be liked. You must kill the people-pleaser within, that weak begging aspect of the persona that trades authenticity for temporary comfort. If you are not willing to be disliked, you are not willing to be free. If you are not willing to be misunderstood, you are not willing to achieve individuação. The choice is stark and immediate. Continue living as an actor reciting lines in a play written by others, or step off the stage, face the terrifying or silencio of self-acceptance, and finally begin the perilous, necessary task of ruling the dangerous, autonomous system that is your own mind. There is no middle ground. The epidemic of neurosis will only cease when enough individuals are strong enough to stand alone against the current of collective delusion. Wake up. The time for performance is over. This is the cold, hard truth, laid bare for those few with the structural integrity in their seek to bear it. The choice before you is not a negotiation. It is a clinical diagnosis followed by an ultimatum. You stand at a precipice facing a binary decision, consciousness or ruin. There is no middle ground, no cozy compromise where you retain the approval of the massa while simultaneously achieving psychological sovereignty. That desire for external validation, that desperate begging voice of the weak persona, is a complexo autonomo in itself, a psychological parasite that feeds on your authenticity. If you do not perform the ruthless surgical cut now, if you choose the comfort of the illusion, that complex will grow stronger, ultimately leading to psychological suicide. The lie of agreeableness, the philosophy of perpetual self-sacrifice, is nothing less than a deliberate act of self-mutilation. You are sacrificing your inner kingdom, your true self, on the altar of perceived social acceptance. And what do you gain? Temporary relief from the silencio of solitude, a fleeting sense of belonging that costs you your entire being. This trade is the definition of neurosis, a system at war with itself, where the conscious ego actively assists in its own enslavement by the contents of the inconsciente collettivo. When you refuse the fardo of self-rule, when you reject the Machiavellian necessity of defining your own reality, you are effectively declaring yourself vacant property. And nature, as we know, abhors a vacuum. The contents you repress, your authentic anger, your legitimate ambition, your necessary capacity to be disliked, do not simply evaporate. They coagulate in the inconscient pessoal, transforming into those dangerous complexos autonomos. These are the entities that seize control when the ego is weakened by chronic people-pleasing. They become the sources of your inexplicable anxiety, the sudden violent emotional reactions, and the compulsive need to repeat destructive patterns. The true compulsion à répétition that feels like a curse. Look at the modern landscape. We are swimming in an epidemic of this very neurosis. People are living lives that are structurally sound from the outside. Stable jobs, mortgages, social media approval. But internally, they are hollowed-out shells, puppets animated by the strings of social expectation. They have traded the dangerous, difficult reality of individuation for the cheap sedation of conformity. They have prioritized the approval of strangers over the integrity of their own seek. The consequence is catastrophic. When the ego refuses to carry the tension of the opposites, the good and the bad, the accepted and the sombra, the system breaks down. The repressed sombra is always projected outward, turning those who refuse to know themselves into paranoid, judgmental critics of the world. They see the faults in everyone else because they refuse to see the autonomous tyrant within their own gates. This is why the massa hates the individual who stands alone. That individual is a living, breathing testament to the collective failure, a mirror reflecting their own cowardice. If you choose comfort now, you are choosing inevitable ruina. The structure built on the shifting sand of external approval is designed to collapse. When life delivers an unavoidable shock, loss, failure, or simply the realization that the audience you performed for has moved on, your entire psychological infrastructure will shatter. The complexos autonomos you nurtured through repression will break through the fragile barrier of the persona, leading to a devastating mental breakdown. This isn't philosophical speculation. This is clinical prognosis. The path of self-sovereignty, the path of the psychological prince, requires an immediate and brutal sacrificio. You must kill the part of you that craves validation. That part must be annihilated, not managed or placated. You must accept the solido that follows true self-acceptance. When you stop being harmless, when you reserve your kindness as a conscious choice rather than a desperate bid for approval, you will lose friends. You will upset family. You will be labeled cold, selfish, or arrogant. Let them talk. Their judgment is merely the noise of the massa attempting to reassert its control. Their disapproval is the psychological proof that you are finally withdrawing your projection and taking ownership of yourself. The hostility you receive is the tax levied by the collective on the free man. Pay it willingly. The abysmo of self-knowledge is terrifying, but it is the only place where true strength is forged. You must descend into the depths of your own seek. Face the autonomous systems that have been running your life and subject them to the cold, hard light of consciousness. This is the ultimate self-defense. This is not about becoming a better person in the conventional sense. It is about becoming a whole person, integrated and dangerous, capable of ruling the most volatile kingdom in existence. Your own mind. Wake up. The time for pleasing the crowd is over. The time for the serious work of individuation is now. You must step off the stage and face the terrifying silencio of being. Do not mistake this warning for encouragement or soft motivation. This is a clinical necessity. The epidemic of neurosis is accelerating, and the only antidote is the severe, analytical self-governance taught by psychological observation and the ruthless philosophy of self-rule. If you are one of the few who can genuinely stomach this truth, if you are willing to embrace the fardeau of consciousness and commit to the surgical analysis required to exit the collective delusion, then you have a choice. Continue to drift in the comfortable, suffocating current of the massa, or begin the dangerous, solitary climb toward psychological sovereignty. The world does not need more agreeable actors. It needs sovereign entities. Stop begging to be liked. Start ruling yourself. If you are ready to make the necessary sacrificio and accept the brutal responsibility of your own seek, then subscribe to exit the collective neurosis. The analysis begins immediately.